Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to What Lies Beyond AI and Data Transformations, presented by SGInnovate and in support of SG Women in Tech. I am Ziying from SGInnovate. We are a government-owned organization that invests in and helps build deep tech startups that leverage science and technology to make lives better for all. A big part of our work is to build a global community of leaders and doers who are driving deep tech innovations such as AI, cybersecurity, medtech, quantum tech in our economy and society. Today, we are very excited to have a great panel from Infineon Technologies, Standard Chartered, Microsoft, and Mayro here to share their perspective and insights into AI and data transformations. We would like this to be an interactive session, so if you have any questions during the panel discussion, do post them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. And do use the chat box to connect with our wider community. Without further ado, let me pass the time to our moderator for today, Yana Marley-Jiskova, co-founder and CEO of Mayro, and co-founder and volunteering CEO of She Loves Data. Yana, please.
Thank you very much. Welcome this afternoon here broadcasting from Singapore. I hope everyone is okay. And I am super pleased to be here. It is actually exciting to sit on this panel with extremely established leaders and to be discussing AI and data digital transformations. I will ask our panelists to introduce themselves, and thank you to SGInnovate to bring us together, because while we were preparing for this panel, we actually said this is exciting time to be again together and have some meaningful discussion. Let's start with Sunita. Sunita, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sunita. Thanks, Yana, for the introduction. I come from a very unconventional background, as a person in AI now, my background has been mainly in physics, actually. So I'm a physics math double major. Then I was in my physics PhD, moved to consulting, went back into data analytics, analysis, data science. Funnily enough, we never used to call it data science when we were doing the same thing in science. So when I moved into data science, I'm like, what is that? And then moved into business analytics to be on the cusp of business management and data science, and then into AI. In my last role in consulting before my current job, I was leading AI strategy as well as responsible AI for the region. And currently with Microsoft, I am the data and AI lead for Microsoft Asia. So it's a pleasure being here and look forward to the conversations ahead. Thanks, Yana.
Thank you so much, Sunita. Mary, let's continue with you. We've been discussing various different topics for a few years now, and now you are in your exciting new role at Standard Chartered. Tell us about that.
Thank you, Yana. It's such a pleasure to be here and such a pleasure to reconnect with Sunita. Fantastic to be with Charmaine, fantastic panel. So I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Mary Rosic. I've been in Singapore for the past 15 years, and I've worked in 6 countries, always in technology. And I think we've called it, I completely agree, Sunita, we've called it by different names over different periods. It was systems dynamics, it was, there's been always exciting things to do with data and with technology. And I currently lead the data teams at the Standard Chartered as a Chief Data Officer for the commercial organization. And it's a pleasure to help drive value with data and continue to drive the maturity of the analytics organization. So I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Mary. Charmaine, we don't know each other so well, so please introduce yourself. This is great to have you on this panel, and I'm excited to actually hear about your opinions on AI and data transformations.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm very happy to be on the panel today with all of you, with Yana, Mary, and Sunita. So I'm actually coming from the engineering background. So I have over 20 years of experience in the embedded systems. And I graduated from the NUS Bachelor's of Engineering with honors, and has contributed on different fronts on engineering works. I started at Siemens, which then became the Infineon Technologies, where I am today. And I was a product application engineer for microcontrollers. and then I moved on to the specification of microcontroller products. And over this period, also having the chance to lead global teams of global product teams, yeah, on the product concept and application engineering perspective. And in my current role, I am heading the systems integration team at the development center. We have groups of people in the team working, looking to leverage AI into different fields of applications, leveraging Infineon products. So I think it's a good blend with the know-how of our other panels here. So I'm looking forward to our session today.
Absolutely. Sunita, you mentioned that, it's been a completely different term for, artificial intelligence, for data science. So let's actually establish these terms before we dive into the questions, because I started 20 years ago at SAS and we were talking about data mining, not data science. So let's, Charmaine, can you help me to explain what we will be talking about when we mean and discuss data transformations, digital transformation, and AI?
Okay, I'm very happy to do that. Yes. So what is AI? AI is maybe to say it in a more layman way, is a simulation of the human intelligence in machines that are programmed to think more like human, to act more like a human, in the sense of making autonomous decisions and to execute or to transact a corresponding action or reaction. So this involves learning and problem solving, and data being the source, right? Just like a child growing up, reading books and becoming more apt, as we gain more experience to respond to the environment and the situation and how to behave appropriately. So the formal definition of AI is the ability of a computer or a robot, that is controlled by a computer to do tasks that are usually done by humans, because they require human intelligence and discernment. In terms of the data transformation, in computing, data transformation is the process of converting data in a certain form to another form. This has been from the computing sphere, right? Standard definition of a data transformation. But when you bring it to the AI perspective, then the goal here is that you have a set of data and you want to gain more visibility in terms of the interpretation of the available data and to take meaning of this data from the business or the organization relevance. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And that's the challenge that is ahead of every business and every organization today. Making sense out of the vast amount of data that's created and actually use it in a way so it influences positively the business results. So the digital transformations is actually influencing the way we do business. There is a new technology adoption all the time. There is a more and more data that we are collecting and using for the data-driven decisions. And we have different legal compliances, but with that comes as well a culture shift. So Sunita and Mary, tell me, how do you see, and we start with Mary, with a large organization, how do you actually as a large business adopt these changes? What are the practical tips and point of view of large organization? And then maybe Sunita, you can look at it from a mid-size and a small organization.
Thanks, Jana. I think this is the $1 million question, right? That's always the challenge. So, technology is easy. We are difficult because changing, it's hard, and changing our habits and changing the way that we do things, it's challenging. So we always need to look at understanding where we are and where we need to be. So instead of taking an incremental approach, or this is the next feature, this is the next deliverable, we need to look at this is the target state. In an ideal world, if I can choose from everything that's possible, this is where our technology stack, our talent, our solutions, where they should be. And then we work backwards. But creating this call to action, this vision for the organization requires to move away from traditional business intelligence then we need to focus on setting up the capabilities that are required to build a high-performing talent and culture, because without the right people, we can never execute. People think that, oh, just implementing this vendor or launching this partnership, we're going to get it done. But it's always about the people. It's building a high-performing team that makes a complete difference. And then once you have that team, you create the technology integrated tech stack that allows you to go from small experiments into scalable and execution. And this is where you are fully real-time integrated into systems and creating business value. So there's no secret sauce. It's always a lot of hard work to build these foundational elements. And we always start with the team and the culture.
And I can't agree more that technology is only 20-30% of the whole change. So I know that we have some startups and smaller companies listening to us. Sunita, how does that work in a smaller organization? Because, you know, driving the experiments and kind of, you know, scale it, it is sometimes easier, but sometimes, you know, you are actually drawn back by the cost of talent, cost of these experiments as well. What is your take?
Yeah, I think, well, I wish I had a magic wand for the cost part, but what I would say is, you know, there's a lot of companies out there, especially the small and medium-sized companies, which think that AI always has to be, you know, state of the art, compare themselves with, you know, the most amazing parts of AI only, and they only look at that. There is AI in a lot of things that we do on a day-to-day basis that can be adopted pretty quickly, right? So everything doesn't have to be, you know, neural networks and computer vision. There's also machine learning. There's also basic data science, data and analytics that you can start with, which isn't that high of a cost, which isn't that hard to start with. I think the POC part of it is super important. If you get a proof of concept underway, identify quick wins that you can, either to get everyone on board or whether to test how it would look with your data and your environment, do it. I think that starting step is very important, and then you can move on from there. Of course, you will get there eventually when you look at the bigger companies and say, oh yeah, we want to go there. You're not going to go there on day 1 or 2, right? So you will get there eventually, but unless you start, I think how to prove the outcomes and positive outcomes of AI is never going to be known. And how to dodge the negative aspects as well. I mean, that's important. You'll never know until you step into it.
So this requires a massive cultural shift. And, you know, I'm talking to organizations, small and large, on a daily basis. And there is this debate, you know, when and how this cultural shift is actually driven from, you know, is it top down? Is it bottom up? What is your experience, Charmaine, to drive this massive transformation? What are your experiences on the journey and any practical tips that you've experienced and actually saw some positive results?
Yeah, Infineon is a very big company, so we have many sites across the globe, and we have so many different groups looking into different parts of the business, of our business, and also different aspects of the operations, the processes, from the conceptualize of products to the manufacture of products, and of course, eventually to market and to sell these products. And therefore, along with this, at Infineon, we have kind of adopted both ways. There's a top-down approach also, in a sense of creating more awareness about how AI can be applied across the organization, and setting up the infrastructure such as the data infrastructure, the servers, and even also some of the soft processes, the pipelines, to enable such projects. But I have to say that a large part at Infineon is driven bottom up. So the engineers, the groups that are the subject matter experts of their respective groups. In fact, whether they are engineering or maybe from the logistics teams, for example, right, or from production to better improve our process and the product. So it's really driven kind of bottom up. And in the beginning, of course, each group are doing things on their own, but the company is coming together, and together with the top-down perspective, we are definitely streamlining and optimizing the way of doing our projects. Yeah.
Thank you. Sunita, what do you advise your clients regarding, you know, all the aspects of the data digital transformation?
I think it depends on, you know, who is the one who wants to go down the path of digital transformation, AI, data transformation, all of that. Usually, you know, if there's one person in the company who is very passionate about it, it's about how you get everyone else to understand your thoughts. And that's easier said than done, right? But that's why I keep emphasizing the fact that you need to do a POC, because doing that can get a lot of people on board, help people understand their roles and responsibilities in the organization. And that, you know, it's not just, you know, the CDO's role or the CDAO's role or the CTO's role, that we're all responsible for this and we all have accountability and responsibility to make this work. So I would say that you definitely need to have a top-down approach. Get your people in the company to understand why is it important to do this, and what do you see this moving forward as. It also is a bottom-up approach, because, you know, you want to make sure that the data scientists or the tech people or the data engineers are understood, and they are helped along the way in this journey, right? So it's not like there are two different teams, it's all coming together. And again, it's only when you dive that you would know how to swim. So I think that you need to just dive into it, start with a POC, do something, and then you will understand where people fit, what are people's roles and responsibilities, because usually in AI transformations, I've seen that business stakeholders go, that I can't do that. I mean, that's not my thing. I don't want to get into that. Or they can go, that's my data. Why are you playing around with my data? And then it becomes like this, you know, who's responsible, who's accountable for this. And again, when you start doing a POC, you start to get people to really understand tactically, and because with practice, oh, I see how this comes together now. I see what my role is in this. Yes, it's my data, and yes, you're going to process it. Yes, I can draw insights out of it, right? And that's how we all come together. I think that is super important. That's what I advise. You start off with something, and then you make people aware of who's who.
So when you move beyond the phase of POC, and let's say you are, you know, beyond this experimental part of adoption, what is happening next? So a lot of my clients are talking about data strategy. Who actually owns the data strategy within the organization? You know, and I know it's another $1 million question. Who owns it? Who owns the strategy? You touched, who owns the data? You know, is it a part of the overall business plan of the organization, or is a data strategy, you know, through a partially distributed throughout the entire organization? Sunita, you started to talk about that. Do you have any view on that? And what is the advice from, I would say, a consulting perspective? And then I would ask Mary, you know, how is it done, you know, in the organization, in a finance industry? I
feel like quite afraid to speak about this in front of Mary right now, because I know what the answer should be. I really feel like we don't want to get into like tech versus business. So I think we need an independent person to step in and own it. Usually in organizations now, I mean, we have Mary here, the CDO, the role of the CDO and the role of the CDAO, which is the Chief Data and Analytics Officer, is exactly that. It's to move the company in that digital transformation journey. They're supposed to be, you know, impartial to both, you know, the business as well as technology, right? They're supposed to sit on the intersection between the two, and it's super difficult. But that's the role of the CDO, CDAO. Now, what they're supposed to do as next steps is a very interesting question. Is you know, once you start playing around with the POC, you start to help people understand what their roles are and responsibilities are, and then you start to scale out. maybe bring in a few other projects, maybe bring in a few other teams, and then you can keep going with that. But I see Mary grinning. I'm gonna pass it over to her for a second.
I'm really looking forward to hear from Mary, because as well, like that there are various different roles of the CDO. It's the defensive, it's the offensive. You know, what role do you play, Mary? And where's the data strategy?
I think that it's one of those questions that warrant a definition before we start answering it. CDOs are relatively new roles, and they have evolved in many cases from whether it's analytics or from data science, sometimes from technology, and there's a mix of strategy, right? So what the CDO needs to do in reality is to drive the organization's maturity to the next level. And that means different things in different industries, but at the end of the day, it's about these three pillars, right? It's the talent and the culture. So it's hiring better for the skills gaps of the organization. So if an organization is migrating to cloud, automating, executing certain, driving towards certain technologies, we need to identify the skill gaps. Are people fully trained in these? Do they feel comfortable? Do we have what we need to succeed? And then creating the right experiments, learning cycles, coaching, deliberate practice, everything that we need to put in place to create that pillar. That is one of the key pillars of the of any learning and maturity journey. Then the infrastructure and technology, and this is typically what we call the data strategy, right? But the data strategy, it's a journey. It's about many different aspects that we need to put in place to succeed and to drive value from data. The technology stack is typically what most people see as the data strategy, and that has, the governance layers, whether it's data features, store the, analytics platforms, and how that fits through APIs into the applications in real-time, feedback loops, and the execution of the advanced data science models in production. And everybody talks about AI, but nobody does it. The reality is that nobody has enough data to actually execute at scale, and I think that is really the exciting part. By the way, can everybody hear us? Because I see messages coming through. I'm not sure if the connection is working well.
I hear you loud and clear.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay.
So I think I try to move away from data strategy into data journey, because I don't think a strategy. Some companies say, "Oh, my strategy is a partnership with, AWS or Microsoft or Google. Oh, my data strategy is," well, I don't think your data strategy is one single thing. I think a data strategy is a journey, and it's a journey that it's a continuous learning, to continue to upgrade the organization, to bring everybody along, and to transform the organization with a new technology stack and with new solutions that are going to extract value from data. And we shouldn't position it as this cycle or this year or this, because it's not just that short-minded, short-term execution. We need to really build the foundations that make it work. And Sunita knows exactly what I'm talking about, because we've worked together on building those foundations, right?
That's exciting.
Yeah.
We have a question from Rashid. We have a question from Rashid, and he's asking, considering there is an overlap between business and technology teams, particularly when you start adopting data science and machine learning, how have you structured your tech teams and organization to avoid overlap and complement the business? So it goes to you, Mary.
So, look, overlap will always exist when we transform things, because transforming means changing, and it could be, from global to regional, or it could be from end-to-end to capability model, or it could be many different attributes. It could be that we had everything centralized in an infrastructure or technology organization, and we want to decentralize and how decisions are made or how infrastructure works. So there will always be an element of friction. Friction is not something bad. I think it's good to have a little bit of energy in the organization, and sometimes competing points of view are very healthy. The scientific method is about having competing systems and competing methods and challenging. The challenger model is about that. So nothing wrong with a little bit of friction, as long as people understand that this is a transformation process, and then they drive the best outcomes.
I like it that you actually rename it into journey, because it never ends, right? It's an evolving process. It's very, very true. Now, another question which comes to mind is, how do you actually measure success of using data for the business decision making and for adopting all the new technologies? Charmaine, can you share with us if you have some practical examples of the ROI? And then now I'm talking about the return of investment on the technology side, that actually makes sense for measuring the business results.
Yes, the ROI is actually a very important aspect. Definitely, we need to, when we start a project, we need to understand what is the value proposition, right? Such as what are we trying to do for the end users of the system? What objectives do we want to serve, right? That's the value proposition. And then you have to also consider the data sources. What are the, where does the raw data come from, right? Is it internal as available, or do I have to get it from external? Or do I have to do experiments to get this right, for example? And in this case, then, would the data be updated over time as well, yeah? And the other perspective is, of course, when you start a project, is also to consider the outcome to achieve. In this case, this is what you want to accomplish out of this AI, machine learning or deep learning task. Yeah, the project itself, what is the outcome that you want to achieve? And last but not least, when you finally deploy these systems, how do you maintain it? How do you monitor its performance, right? The practical usage in the field, and the potentials for upgrades and needs for upgrade or update. So with this in mind, when you start a project, it will help you also to then determine how to consider, right, in terms of the ROI, in the return on investments. So basically, AI project, right, the goal is to take the meaning of the data to the business relevance, as we said just now. Yeah. So business relevance, I would like to give some examples. It could be to improve or to automate a process, such as by predictive maintenance, such as in a factory, or it could be to get insights, perspectives on the focus aspects for a business decision, for the business insights, and then last but not least, also possibly to make a smarter automated products. So end products that could go to potentially end consumers, right? That could do the AI interpretation, without human intervention. So by understanding these applications in mind, keeping the applications in mind, what is the purpose of your project? So metrics can be defined, and I would tend to say metrics for measuring ROI is unique. Typically unique, I would tend to say, is unique to the problem and even the organization that we are looking at it from. And then the key is to define, right? So again, looking at the project and then to define and write down the metrics, such as what can we measure, what can we quantitatively measure to quantify this improvement in the process, the product, etc. And if it's a business efficiency aspect, then is this efficiency leading to shorter lead times? Can we actually do more in shorter time? So this is looking at another level already. And yes, do we overall react faster as an organization? Do we even make better decisions, right? Besides being faster, better decisions is also one of the potential outcome or applications. So in the end, the ROI is all about, is this AI output, is it useful? Or is it even misleading? Can I rely on it? So it's really depending on the project and the organization that you're looking at. Yeah.
So let me give you an example. A lot of organizations are actually now going through the transformation from being product-centric into being customer-centric. And this is the whole point of the digital transformation, that we put the customer and the behavior of the customer in the middle of everything we do: product development, customer service, sales, marketing, communication. And what I've seen is that my clients are asking me, how do I actually transfer the entire organization, and how do I measure the ROI to go through this shift? How do I, because it's basically about the resetting all the measurements and KPIs on all organizational level. And how does that even, start? How do you do that, and how do you drive such a drastic change of, on one side, the technology, processes, the people's mindset, and as well the different way of measuring the performance throughout the entire organization, where customer experience, customer journey, customer behavior is measured on all different levels. Sunita, Mary, do you have a view on that? Have you experienced it as in a consulting project, Sunita, and then Mary, in any of your transformation processes in the organization you are working in or worked for? Can we start with Sunita?
Sure. Yeah, I think you really need to understand what is your end goal of implementing the AI system in place, right? So, for example, if I was looking in a manufacturing industry, what are some of the key things that we can do in the space of AI in manufacturing that they can implement? So there will be some KPIs, and most KPIs are related to the customer uptake or the customer related outcomes, right? So, or the business outcomes. So by implementing this, I hope to achieve these many more customer, increase the customer base by 50%. I aim to get customer satisfaction out by 120%. I want to be able to sell so many more things. I want to, upsell and cross sell, and this is how I would measure it. If you keep your KPIs on a business level, everything else just falls into place, because you know what your end goal is. How you get to your end goal, that is up to you. So, whether the technology is there, you can't really, I've never understood how you can use ROIs on tech for AI when tech is an enabler for it, right? So I would say that the technology is an enabling factor, but at the end of the day, you still want to know, has this been successful? Because, I've hit 1, 2, 3, 4, the ones that I mentioned earlier. Think about supply chain, right? So in supply chain, you have a lot of, you have that whole intelligent supply chain. In retail, you have the whole aspects of the customer life cycle. You have, digital marketing metrics that you can measure. There are so many different things that you can measure from a business outcome. How you get there is up to you. To understand the success of AI, those are the things you need to come back and circle back on and say, okay, so I've hit 1, 2, 3, 4, and I've hit it at 50, 120, 60, 40, which is what I wanted to start off with. So this has been successful. Now let me bring in something else, right? I think those are the quantitative aspects. And there are the qualitative aspects, like are my customers satisfied with this entire outcome? Do I see a lot of churn happening from my customers? Is there something unethical happening that I'm not aware of? Is the AI doing something wrong that I'm not aware of? All these measurements you need to do as well to understand the success of AI. So those are, I think, the main things I would say. I think it's all about your business outcomes at the end of the day.
Mary?
I was on mute. So the question is about client-centric or human-centric AI initiatives.
AI initiatives and use of data to do predictions or various different AI and machine learning processes around customer data, so that organizations can actually be ready for the digital disruption that we are going through.
Yes, I think first of all is we need to understand what is the problem that we are trying to solve for, because in many cases I see companies or startups using AI for problems that don't have enough data, that they are not the right tool or not the right problem. Or, sometimes you see a lot of technologies looking for a problem rather than, like problems that are being solved. So first of all is starting with the problem and having a very deep understanding of what is the problem that we are trying to solve. And then understanding what data sets do we need, what are the best tools. If AI is really the best tool to solve this problem, then we need to go a little bit deeper, understanding the regulatory environment and how is that going to have maybe explainability implications, maybe how is that going to be executed in different regulatory environments, countries, in different aspects. But I think we have to always keep a problem-centric approach, which is a human-centric approach at the end of the day, right? It's trying to understand what is it that we are trying to do rather than just testing things for the sake of testing them, which I also see this happening very often.
Absolutely, problem-centric approach is always a good one. We have a question for an organization that has embarked on the data transformation journey and does not have a data warehouse or data lake yet. How does implementing AI work? Who wants to jump on that? Charmaine?
Yeah, maybe I can cover that. So in general, I would say you have to consider whether you want to, the value of this data, is it generated internally, firstly, right? And can you obtain it internally? And if so, would you like to keep this data private, right? Perhaps into your own servers. So therefore, you will need to have your own data servers, data lake. And of course, there are also options out there, such as just to name an example, the Amazon servers, right? Where you can upload your data and you can also do your development in the cloud. So it really depends on the company. What is the value of this data? And they could also have a mix of both, yeah. And but in the end, the company should, of course, make a clear strategy here in terms of how to handle the data throughout the organization, and having people understand what level of data, what kind of let's say privacy you need on different kinds of data, so that you do not also compromise on your data, or if maybe somebody load this data to online cloud, for example. So the thing here is if the data is also internally in the company servers, then your access is in control at your side. But if it's in the cloud, yeah, there's also the possibility that so there's pros and cons, but there's the possibility that let's say if you do not have internet access, or if that's down, yeah, so the data transfer, the latency, or this, there could be some problems if you have internet connections. So yeah.
Anyone wants to end on that? Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add on. I had my hand raised. I don't know if anyone's even looking. But anyway, I think just to add on to that, it really depends on if the company wants to scale big or not. And that's where cloud services come in as a super useful feature in the backend. That the scalability and just expanding on your data. I mean, of course, I would name Microsoft, but then there are like other cloud providers out there, right? So it totally depends on what the company's strategy is with respect to how much they want to scale. If you want to keep it small scale, you can store it locally or on-prem. If you want to scale up really rapidly, really large, then definitely cloud is probably your best bet there.
I think that's really true. I've seen it with some of my clients. to build a data foundation based on the business strategy is the beginning of the journey. And I think there are various different ways how to do that, whether it's warehouse or data lake. That's, I would say, the secondary actually question, but to have some data repository and understanding what you need to do and how you will be using this data for your decision making and how it will actually align with what you're trying to achieve in terms of innovation, in terms of where you're going with your tech stack and how you scale. This is something that is important to discuss, as a step zero, I would almost say. This is a great discussion. Now we've been covering the culture, the tech, and Mary mentioned that actually talent and culture of the people and the constant learning is something that is very important in the data transformation journey and adopting AI. So what are the top skills? And we will go one by one that you see that are critical to have in the organization as you build and as you embark on this journey. What do you all three feel it's very important to have? Shall we start with Charmaine?
Yeah, sure. Okay. From Infineon perspective, and also from my department perspective, I would say, and having the being the subject matter expert, having that for my case would be having that engineering background in this area of application would be important, and also very important is having the computer technology and the programming know-how, and so such as the programming languages. I think one of them is the Python, which is one of the key skill set, or know-how needed. And a third point I would say is someone who is open-minded, someone who is able to, motivated to learn, because I have to say this development flow is, there's still many room to improve, the way data is collected, the way data is processed and labeled, the way data is forwarded for training, the way you set up your AI training framework, and to the way AI inference is done, and and the way to present the results perhaps on the UI. So is a very large area, end-to-end of some people focus only that they say they call themselves as data curators, so they only focus on the data, right? And so is a someone who's open-minded and willing to learn and gain more skill sets along the way. I think these are the important skills from my point of view.
Very well. Mary, what is your take?
I think one of the key, of course, there are technical skills that we need to have as a foundation. But what I think we need to develop as organizations is critical thinking around data. And we need to be able to look at visualizations or dashboards or any results and be able to look at that from a critical point of view with a very constructive an open mindset and say, does that really make sense? Is that really the best way to tell this story? Is this data telling us the story that we need to learn, or is this just proving the point that we want it to prove? And I think I don't see enough critical thinking around the use of data. I think, they famously say that if you massage data enough, it can tell you any story. And I think that's, the reason is because we don't have enough critical thinkers around what it means. And we've seen this with COVID. We've seen this in many different situations. The data is telling us a story. Sometimes we don't want to hear it. And it's because we need to learn to think more strategically around data.
I cannot agree more. Sunita, would you add something?
No, I think, look, all technical skills aside, data science skills, I think people, number one is they focus a lot on data science when they think about AI. They don't realize that another very key component to all of this is data engineering. If you don't know how to move the data from one place to another, ingestion all the way to the end game, there is no point in developing data science models in silo, right? So you definitely need that lineage person who can connect it end to end. Another thing is just domain skills. Like I can look at a data or a dashboard and insights all day long and really not understand anything because I'm not from that domain expertise. So you definitely need that domain expertise. The other thing that you need to know is you need to know how to know both data science, data engineering, and domain. I'm not saying you need to be 100% on everything, but enough to be able to bridge that gap, because that's where the whole concept of translators came along. So AI translators, data science translators. And the idea of those people was that, data scientists were speaking in their own language, and the business folks were speaking in their own language. There's nothing connecting the two of them. So that's where these people came along. So I think everyone needs to have a component of that in their role moving forward, for sure. So yeah, these I think are the three things. And if you think about it, I've worked in AI in consulting firms with some of the leading people who have had sociology majors, right? They have nothing to do with anything else. But the fact is, they come in, they bring this amazing perspective, especially in the whole field of responsible AI. They just bring in an amazing perspective to say, that makes sense, from a privacy perspective, that makes sense from a governance perspective, laws, public policy, everything put together. I can't do that. We need people who have that kind of mindset, right? So, I think those are some of the main skills I would think about.
I can't agree more. This is absolutely so true that you need to have this diverse group, and it brings us to diversity, right? We need diversity around data and AI. And you are all very experienced leaders in your field. How do you view the role of diverse teams, and let's say even women in tech and women around AI? How do we actually help to drive better results with those diverse teams? And how can those diverse teams are helping to create those new mindset and shifting the cultures that we need in our organizations? I really would love to hear your take on that. Maybe we start with Mary.
So I think it's easy. More diversity means more points of view. And when I interview people, I ask them an open-ended, it's a blue sky question at the end, which is, there's no right or wrong answer. And I just want to see how they think. So sometimes people go back to the problem and they think from a mathematical point of view. Sometimes they're using their experience. Sometimes they're using history. Sometimes, and you get to see what are the tools that they use in order to make sense of new problems. And this is what diversity gives us. If you have everybody who's trained in the same school with the same background, same education, same system, then everybody will solve the problem with the same toolkit. And it's not just about gender, and it's not just about education. It's industries, it's having global experience, having worked in different countries, having a different point of view on how things should actually work based on how we have experienced the world. And this is truly what really creates a high-performing team, solving problems from many different angles, right? And this is for me through the diversity. How to create it? We have to start by not identifying the bias and being aware of the biases that we have. So I may have a bias towards education because the way I grew up, education was the key tool to really get ahead. So I have to work very hard to remove that bias. I'm conscious of it. I try to remove it. So I look at people based on skills. Do they have a high Kaggle ranking? Wow, forget about their education. They actually have proof that they can actually execute. So these are the things that we need to be conscious when it comes to building diverse teams. It's identifying the bias, removing, and then making sure that we have different points of view.
It needs to have a very different hiring processes as well, and then change basically the procedures of cultivate those diverse teams. I agree that diversity is not only gender, it goes way, way beyond that. Charmaine, any points of looking at those biases? Did you have any experience where diverse teams actually drove better results?
Yeah, actually, I thought it would be interesting to quote a World Economic Forum study. They were reporting that there was this robot reader that analyzed some few tens of billion of words, yeah, from books dating back to sometime in the 1900s, and they discovered that gender bias, yeah, in both fiction and non-fiction texts, yeah, could actually have serious repercussions for machine learning, for AI, and because this results that is learned from going through these books, yeah, going as mentioned, going back to 1900s, they produced bias, and actually in this case, the report was about gender bias, because these algorithms work by identifying the patterns, right, in the data that they were fed with, and so since the data are biased, and therefore the outcome is also biased. So one effect is, of course, so who gets hired if companies are using AI to sort the job applications, right? So another example is, of course, then you could have smartphones or systems that are skewed more towards perhaps towards a certain gender, or and etc. So yes, there is definitely a bias, and not just gender bias, which is a potential, and therefore I also want to come back to the point that it is important that women are involved in AI-driven transformation solutions, because we are part of the human ecosystem. We are the other half, right, of the human world. So as Mary said, the perspectives from individuals, such as their creativity, their viewpoints from their, from the education and the place where they've grown up. So that diversity is what we are looking for. And by having that diversity, it also actually increase the participation, the trust, and the cooperation of the employee groups in the company. Yeah.
Thank you, Charmaine. Last but not least, before we dive into questions from our audience, I have a question to you all. What is next in this space? What do you see as an emerging trend, and what companies should be looking out for? Sunita, can we start with you?
Sure. I think there's just so much of, things like visualization. Again, back to Mary's point, I think that how we strengthen that particular thing. I know it's a very weak word, especially because people have talked it around quite a bit, but it's super important to make sure that you have that visualization in check. It's also like the data story and the journey. I think that is, from a data perspective, that's key. I think as companies start adopting AI, you definitely need to keep a check on the ethics part of AI, and what things you need to take into account that the machine starts to do by itself. Learn from others out there who have already tried and tested and have failed and then tried again, right? And that's another key thing. You don't want to just fail and then never get back up again. So I think those kinds of things are super important. Of course, there's all that wonderful, science fictional stuff about, what if, machines start thinking and then they take over humans and all these wonderful things. And, that's a great topic to talk about, but we're not there yet. So I think let's focus one step at a time. There was an interesting conversation that I had with someone who said, I don't want the machine to start, thinking like humans do, because then we're all doomed. And I'm like, okay, how do you bring in emotions into the machine? Because that's still a missing component, right? I mean, it's logic-based. I don't want that happening, because then it's all going to fail and we're going to be doomed. And I'm like, all right. So I think, people have, the kind of things that have been portrayed have been some things out there. We're still in the AI space. I think there's a lot going on, whether it's understanding NLP. I think people, natural language processing, just people's sentiments, how they're analyzed. I think those are very key, especially with the new gen now cropping up. How are they conversing? How do we cater to them? How does AI cater to them? That's important. Things like computer vision and stuff, just to analyze. With COVID right now, it's been been quite up and coming as well to use AI in those aspects. So lots to look forward to anyway. But data, definitely all the lineage and end-to-end journey is very important.
Thank you. Mary?
Yes, the question was?
The question was, what are we up to? What are the trends? What do you see that there will be a new trends in the near future organizations will need to adopt in terms of data and AI?
I think we need to always keep our horizon scanning in around 10 to 15 years and look at what is it that we need to put in place today to succeed in 5, in 10, and in 15 years when this happens. Some of the key things that we are starting to work on is quantum computing, for example, which will speed up our ability to process bigger problems with way bigger amounts of data. So the kind of problems that we can solve when that is available, and we do have some research in partnerships with technology companies where we are building these machines as we speak, and it's really exciting to see the kind of use cases that can be run. I think it's a continuous learning process. So for me, it's really not so much what it's coming, but how can we make sure that we are ready to continuously learn and to be ready for what's coming, right? It's that continuous learning journey.
Absolutely. Charmaine?
Yes, so there are huge potential applications. Some of it might not even be so clear to us, that can be enabled by AI in the future. But we can already see that there will be, impact or effects to organizations, such as a business or a company. There will be also effects that we will see in the future of, let's say, smart cities, smarter cities, or smart homes, and also at the country level, where government can make better leverage of their systems, so there's a huge range of applications, across the sphere of human organizations. So I think in the end here, we want to be conscious of AI that can make life safer, greener, and easier for everyone on Earth. So let's keep this awareness, and based on the data that we have, let's handle it with care, and let's make AI systems that enable the better world for everyone, right? And not AI monsters. Yeah.
I absolutely agree. It's a very good way to kind of, get to the end of our discussion. Sunita, I wanted to add on.
Yeah, I just wanted to address one of the questions, which is in line with what we were talking about just now. I think that preparing for the next pandemic is a big question. And I think what we can do right now is what we have seen helpful most in this pandemic has been the fact that we can collaborate on data. And that is a very powerful thing. Like, you don't need to have all the data in-house. And I think companies and organizations and individuals need to understand that, right? You can basically use alternative data. You can use data from other sources. How do you bring it all together and then form, an AI on top of that, and now analytics on top of that? I think that's very important. If you look at, Singapore's trades together, for instance, how is everything being connected? How is the data connected? So you have, you're checking in over there. That data is fed in. You have, the thing over here. How do you bring it all together? I think that the power of data coming together is what is going to help us with any other pandemic, which we don't want ever again, but in the future.
Absolutely. I would add on as well that one last trend that I see, which is like here, is how do you activate the data? So the data out of all the AI algorithmic processes do not stay in the dashboards and do not stay in a beautiful visualizations, but how do we really connect it to the business processes and we give it to business users for use? That's usually the last mile that is quite challenging. Thank you so much. We are on time. It's exactly 5 p.m. We answered most of the questions, and I hand over to our hosts. And I want to thank you for having a great discussion. Looking forward to seeing you soon in person.
Thank you, Yana, for your moderating, Mary, Shamin, and Sunita for your great insights. And of course, thank you to our 100+ attendees for tuning in and for your engaging questions. It's a pity we didn't have enough time to cover all the many facets of AI and data transformation, but nonetheless, we do hope this session has helped you. If you'd like to revisit the conversation, we will be sending a post-event email with the recording to the session. And we also hope you can connect with us on our various social media channels. And we hope to see you at our future events. Have a great week ahead. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.